Mrs. Carter. The voice cut through the silence of the dining hall so sharply that every conversation around me seemed to stop at once. I looked up from my untouched plate. Standing near the entrance was a man in a dark grey suit holding a leather folder against his chest. He appeared to be in his late 50s, his silver hair neatly combed, his expression serious enough to make my stomach tighten. For a moment, I thought he must have mistaken me for someone else. Then he looked directly into my eyes. Mrs. Elena Carter. I swallowed. Yes. The man nodded once. I've been looking for you for nearly 20 minutes. Around me, forks froze in midair. Conversations died. And my husband's entire family turned toward me, with expressions ranging from confusion to irritation. I was not the person people usually looked for at family gatherings. Especially not men in expensive suits. Especially not on the day everything was about to fall apart. My name is Elena Carter. I'm 47 years old. And 3 hours earlier, I had stood in my kitchen holding a cup of tea for my husband while believing my marriage was perfectly ordinary. I was wrong. Because by the end of that day, a single piece of paper hidden in my wardrobe would destroy 23 years of assumptions. It would expose secrets I never imagined. And it would force me to see my life through completely different eyes. But this story does not start here. Welcome back to Revenge Cold Stories. Drop your first name and your city in the comments and subscribe before we go any further. To understand why that man was searching for me in a crowded dining hall, you need to understand the role I had always played in my family. I was the dependable one. Not the successful one. Not the admired one. Not the interesting one. The dependable one. There's a difference. People celebrate successful relatives. They remember interesting relatives. They talk proudly about admired relatives. But dependable relatives become furniture. Useful. Reliable. Invisible. I learned that lesson when I was 8 years old. My father owned a small hardware store in Ohio. The store wasn't large. Roughly 1,800 square feet. 3 aisles. 1 cash register. 1 flickering sign that buzzed every evening after 6 o'clock. My older brother, Michael, was the star of the family. Even at 10 years old, people described him as special. Gifted. Destined for great things. Teachers praised him. Neighbors praised him. Relatives praised him. Whenever guests visited, they heard stories about Michael. His grades. His soccer trophies. His science fair awards. I don't remember anyone asking about mine. One Saturday afternoon, my father asked us to help clean the storage room behind the store. Michael spent 10 minutes carrying boxes before announcing he was tired. I spent 4 hours organizing inventory. At the end of the day, a customer complimented how neat everything looked. My father smiled. Then pointed toward Michael. He's got a good eye for these things. Michael hadn't even been there. I remember standing beside a stack of paint cans feeling strangely hollow. Not angry. Not devastated. Just unseen. That feeling became familiar. By high school, Michael was still the family prodigy. Meanwhile, I became the problem solver. The helper. The responsible daughter. If grandma needed groceries, I delivered them. If an aunt needed transportation, I drove her. If neighbors needed babysitting, I volunteered. People appreciated me. But appreciation isn't the same thing as recognition. Recognition says, you matter. Appreciation says, you're useful. The distinction took me years to understand. Ironically, I became more successful than anyone expected. I graduated near the top of my college class. Earned a degree in accounting. Started working for a regional financial firm. At 28, I was managing accounts worth over $12 million. At 35, I became a senior financial analyst. At 42, I helped oversee portfolios totaling nearly 80 million. Yet somehow family conversations still treated me like background noise. Michael's startup idea would receive 40 minutes of discussion. My promotion received 30 seconds. That wasn't because my family hated me. The truth was more complicated. People rarely update the stories they tell themselves about others. Once someone becomes the dependable one, evidence doesn't matter. Success doesn't matter. Reality doesn't matter. The story survives. And unfortunately, my husband's family had embraced that same story. I met Daniel Carter when I was 23. He was charming, confident, funny, the kind of man who made strangers feel comfortable within minutes. He worked in commercial sales, had an easy smile, a steady voice, and an ability to make people feel important, including me, at least initially. Looking back now, I realize Daniel genuinely loved me. But love and respect are not always the same thing. Sometimes people love the version of you they've created in their minds. And that's a dangerous thing. Daniel came from a family with very clear roles. His father, Richard, believed achievement determined value. His mother, Margaret, believed appearances determined value. His younger sister, Vanessa, believed attention determined value. And Daniel spent most of his life trying to satisfy all three systems simultaneously. The result was a man who constantly measured people according to invisible scorecards. Income, status, influence, prestige. At first I didn't notice. Because young love hides many things. Over time, however, small patterns emerged. When I received promotions, Daniel congratulated me. But briefly. When his co-workers received promotions, he discussed them for days. When I solved financial problems, he expected competence. When others solved financial problems, he called them brilliant. Tiny differences. Easy to dismiss. Easy to rationalize. Until they accumulate. 23 years of tiny differences eventually become impossible to ignore. Especially when combined with everything else. And everything else began revealing itself on a quiet Tuesday morning. The morning of the tea. The morning of the letter. The morning my life changed forever. That Tuesday began exactly like hundreds of other Tuesdays. At 6:12 a.m. my alarm rang. At 6:18 I was in the kitchen. At 6:31 water was boiling. At 6:37 I poured Daniel's tea into his favorite navy blue mug. 23 years of marriage creates routines so deeply embedded that they happen almost automatically. 1 spoon of sugar. A small splash of milk. Tea steeped exactly 3 minutes. Daniel always claimed he could taste the difference if I left the bag in longer. Whether that was true or not, I never knew. What I did know was that routines can feel like love. And sometimes they hide the absence of it. When I carried the mug upstairs, Daniel was standing near the dresser adjusting his tie. He looked distracted. Not unusual. Lately he seemed distracted often. I assumed it was work. There had been tension at his company for months. Budget cuts. Management changes. Rumors of restructuring. Nothing dramatic. Just enough uncertainty to make everyone nervous. I smiled and held out the mug. Your tea. Normally he would take it immediately. Instead, he barely glanced at it. Then something happened that had never happened before. No, I blinked. What? I don't want it. His tone wasn't angry. That somehow made it worse. Cold indifference often hurts more than anger. You always have tea in the morning. Not today. I stood there awkwardly holding the mug. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he picked up his briefcase. I'll get coffee on the way. That was it. No thank you. No explanation. No smile. Nothing. He simply walked past me and left the room. I listened to his footsteps moving downstairs. Then the front door closing. Then silence. The tea suddenly felt heavier in my hand. It was such a small moment. Insignificant on paper. Yet something about it lodged inside my chest. Not because of the tea. Because of what it represented. For 23 years, Daniel had accepted thousands of small acts of care from me. Breakfast, appointments, laundry, late-night conversations, emergency support, financial planning, family obligations, birthdays, anniversaries, every invisible thing that keeps a household functioning. And for the first time, he had looked directly at one of those acts and rejected it. Not angrily, not thoughtfully, casually, as though it didn't matter. As though I didn't matter. I carried the untouched mug back downstairs. By then the tea had already started cooling. I poured it into the sink. The liquid disappeared instantly. For reasons I couldn't explain, watching it swirl down the drain made my eyes sting. I told myself I was being overly sensitive. Everyone has bad mornings. Everyone gets distracted. Everyone says the wrong thing. But intuition is a strange thing. Sometimes your mind notices patterns before your conscious thoughts catch up. Something felt wrong. Deeply wrong. At 8:15 a.m., I decided to reorganize the bedroom wardrobe. Whenever I felt unsettled, I cleaned. Some people meditate. Some exercise. I organized closets. The activity gave my thoughts somewhere to go. The wardrobe was large. Daniel's clothes occupied the left side. Mine occupied the right. A shelf above held storage boxes. Photo albums. Tax documents. Old greeting cards. The usual collection of items accumulated over decades. I began sorting everything. 30 minutes passed. Then 40. Then I noticed something unusual. Behind a stack of winter sweaters sat a white envelope. At first I assumed it contained receipts. Maybe insurance paperwork. Nothing important. The envelope wasn't sealed. There was no name written on the front. Just plain white paper. I almost ignored it. Almost. Instead, I pulled it free. A single folded document slipped out. The moment I unfolded it, my stomach tightened. The first line read, "To Alina. Not dear Alina. Not honey. Just my name. Cold. Formal. Wrong." My heart started beating faster. I continued reading. With each sentence, the room seemed to tilt slightly. Then tilt again. And again. By the time I reached the bottom of the page, I was no longer breathing normally. I had to force air into my lungs. The letter wasn't from a stranger. It was from Daniel. Written by hand. Dated nearly 3 months earlier. And every word shattered something inside me. The letter explained that he had been considering ending our marriage. Not recently. Not impulsively. For almost a year. He wrote about feeling disconnected. Restless. Unfulfilled. He wrote about wanting a different future. A different life. Then came the sentence that made my hands start shaking. There is someone else. I read it 3 times. Then a 4th. As if repetition might somehow change the meaning. It didn't. The words remained exactly the same. There is someone else. I sat down on the edge of the bed. The paper trembled in my fingers. My first reaction wasn't anger. Oddly, it was confusion. The human brain struggles to process information that directly contradicts reality. Daniel and I had vacationed together 6 weeks earlier. We had attended family dinners, gone grocery shopping, watched movies, Discussed retirement plans. How could someone write this letter while doing all those things? The answer arrived immediately. Because people can perform normalcy long after their feelings change. The realization hurt almost as much as the letter itself. I forced myself to keep reading. Near the end, Daniel wrote something even worse. Not cruel. Not intentionally. Simply honest. And honesty can sometimes be brutal. I don't think you've done anything wrong. I just don't think I've appreciated you the way I should have. The sentence blurred through tears. 23 years. Reduced to that. A lack of appreciation. As though our marriage had been a service he forgot to value. I lowered the papers. The room felt strangely quiet. Outside, a lawnmower hummed somewhere in the distance. A dog barked. Life continued. Meanwhile, mine felt suspended in midair. Then another thought struck me. Why was the letter still here? If Daniel wrote it 3 months earlier, why hadn't he given it to me? Had he changed his mind? Lost his nerve? Forgotten it? The possibility offered a tiny spark of hope. Until I noticed another sheet folded behind the first. My hands shook harder as I opened it. This one wasn't addressed to me. It appeared to be a printed property document. A condominium lease agreement. 6-month term. Downtown apartment. Signed. Paid. Active. Tenant. Daniel Carter. My vision narrowed. For several seconds I simply stared. The apartment had been rented 2 months earlier. 2 months. An entire separate residence. A second life. Existing without my knowledge. Without explanation. Without conversation. Without warnings. I felt as though the floor had vanished beneath me. Exactly like that. Not emotionally. Physically. As though gravity itself had become unreliable. The wardrobe. The bedroom. The house. Nothing felt stable anymore. I don't remember standing up. I don't remember walking downstairs. The next clear memory I have is finding myself seated at the kitchen table. The documents spread in front of me. The clock on the microwave read 9:47 a.m. Nearly 90 minutes had disappeared. My phone sat beside my hand. Daniel's contact information glowed on the screen. 1 call. 1 question. 1 confrontation. Instead, I set the phone down. Because something inside me whispered a warning. Don't confront him yet. Not until you understand the whole story. Not until you know what you're actually looking at. That instinct would prove to be one of the most important decisions of my life. Because before the week ended, I would discover that the letter was only the beginning. And the truth was far larger than I could possibly imagine. For the rest of that day, I moved through the house like a ghost. Not because I was crying. Oddly enough, I wasn't. Shock has a way of postponing emotion. It wraps your mind in a layer of numbness, so you can continue functioning while reality rearranges itself. I folded laundry. Answered 2 work emails. Paid an electricity bill. Even watered the plants on the back patio. From the outside, I looked completely normal. Inside, however, every thought circled the same question. Who was my husband becoming when I wasn't looking? At 4:18 p.m., Daniel came home. I heard his car pull into the driveway. He entered through the garage carrying his briefcase and a paper coffee cup. The same coffee he had chosen over my tea that morning. The detail shouldn't have mattered. Yet it did. Because now every small thing seemed connected. Every gesture felt loaded with meaning. Hey, he said. Hey, he kissed my cheek. The familiarity of it almost made me flinch. Not because I hated him. Because suddenly I didn't know what that kiss represented. Love, habit, guilt, performance. I watched him place his keys in the ceramic bowl near the door. The same bowl I had bought during our second anniversary trip. A trip he once described as one of the happiest weeks of his life. Had that memory changed too? Or was I the only one questioning everything? We ate dinner together that evening. Chicken, rice, roasted vegetables. Nothing unusual. Daniel talked about work. Mentioned a client issue. Complained about traffic. Asked if I remembered the family luncheon scheduled for Saturday. I answered normally. Or at least I think I did. The entire conversation felt surreal. Because hidden inside my desk drawer upstairs were documents proving he had considered leaving me. And yet here he was discussing weekend plans. As though none of it existed. At one point he laughed at something on television. The sound startled me. Not because it was loud. Because it sounded genuine. How could someone laugh like that while carrying such a secret? The answer came later. People rarely experience themselves as villains. Most people simply construct narratives that justify their choices. Somewhere inside Daniel's mind, there was undoubtedly a story that made all of this reasonable. Maybe even necessary. That realization didn't comfort me. But it helped me understand. Around 11:00 p.m. Daniel fell asleep. I remained awake. Staring at the ceiling. Listening to his breathing. 23 years. Nearly 8,400 days. Over 200,000 hours. How much of a person can you truly know? And how much do you merely assume? The next morning I made tea again. Not because I wanted to. Because routines are stubborn. This time Daniel accepted it. Smiled. Thanked me. Everything appeared normal. Which somehow felt worse. 3 days passed. Then 4. I said nothing. Observed everything. And slowly details began revealing themselves. Phone calls taken outside. Messages answered quickly and hidden. Unexpected meetings. Extended errands. Nothing dramatic enough to prove anything. Yet enough to confirm my instincts. Something was happening. The family luncheon arrived on Saturday. Every month, Daniel's family gathered at a country club outside Columbus. The tradition had existed for nearly 15 years. Attendance was considered mandatory. Margaret Carter especially enforced that expectation. My mother-in-law was 72 years old. Elegant, disciplined, deeply concerned with appearances. To outsiders she seemed warm, polished, generous, and in many ways she was. But Margaret viewed life through a very specific lens. Success deserved admiration. Failure deserved correction. And image mattered more than almost everything else. She wasn't cruel. She simply believed social order depended upon people understanding their place. Unfortunately, she had assigned me mine long ago. Reliable daughter-in-law. Helpful, pleasant, and remarkable. The luncheon began at noon. By 12:20, nearly 30 relatives occupied the private dining room. Daniel sat beside me. Vanessa occupied the opposite side of the table. Her husband, Brent, discussed investment opportunities. Richard talked about local politics. Margaret floated between conversations like a queen inspecting her court. Everything appeared ordinary. Until the criticism started. It always started eventually. That day the target happened to be me. The topic was retirement planning. Someone mentioned financial advisors. Another relative praised a consultant charging nearly $600 per hour. Vanessa laughed. Well, if Alina had charged family rates all these years, she'd probably be rich. The table chuckled politely. I smiled. Used to this kind of thing. Then Brent added. She's probably saved half this family from bankruptcy. Maury laughed. Again, harmless on the surface. Yet something about the tone bothered me. Because they weren't acknowledging expertise. They were joking about it. Reducing decades of professional success into a convenient family service. Margaret nodded approvingly. Elena has always been wonderful at helping others. Wonderful. The word sounded complimentary. Yet somehow minimized everything. I had managed multi-million-dollar portfolios. Negotiated complex financial restructurings. Built an impressive career. And somehow the summary remained. Wonderful at helping others. The dependable one. The useful one. The furniture. A strange calm settle. The apartment wasn't for her. The sentence hung in the air. For several seconds I simply stared at Daniel. Because there are moments when reality shifts so suddenly that your mind needs time to catch up. This was one of those moments. I had spent 4 days constructing a story. The letter. The apartment. The secrecy. The hidden correspondence. The emotional distance. Every piece appeared to point toward the same conclusion. Another woman. A second life. An affair. Now Daniel was telling me that conclusion was wrong. Or at least incomplete. I folded my arms. Then explain. His eyes moved toward the papers. Then toward the floor. Then back to me. And for the first time in years, I saw genuine uncertainty in him. Not fear of being caught. Fear of being understood. There was someone else. The words hit hard despite everything. I closed my eyes briefly. Of course there was. He continued. But not in the way you think. I said nothing. He swallowed. Then slowly began talking. The person wasn't a romantic relationship. I remained skeptical. Very skeptical. People caught in lies often replace one story with another. Yet something about his expression felt different. Not polished. Not rehearsed. Raw. Messy. Human. And humans are often hardest to understand when they're telling the truth. It was my brother. I frowned. My brother James. The name surprised me. James Carter. Daniel's older brother. 54 years old. A former contractor. Estranged from most of the family for nearly a decade. I hadn't seen him in years. Margaret rarely mentioned him. When she did, her tone suggested disappointment. Family failure. Bad decisions. Lost opportunities. The usual summary. What about him? Daniel leaned forward. He's sick. The room suddenly felt quieter. How sick? Daniel looked away. His voice dropped. Terminal. I stared at him. For a moment all my anger paused. Not disappeared. Paused. Because some words carry weight regardless of context. Terminal is one of them. How long have you known? About 14 months. 14 months. A year of secrets. A year of lies. A year of distance. Yet somehow not the secret I expected. Daniel rubbed his face. James didn't want anyone knowing. Why? A sad smile appeared. Because he was embarrassed. That sounded exactly like James. Proud. Stubborn. Independent. The kind of man who would rather struggle alone than accept help. Daniel continued. The apartment wasn't for an affair. His voice cracked slightly. It was for him. I felt the ground shift beneath my assumptions. He couldn't afford treatment, couldn't keep working, couldn't manage stairs anymore. Daniel stared at the table. So I rented a place near the hospital. The pieces began moving. Not fitting yet. Moving. The apartment. The secrecy. The money. The distance. None of it matched the story I had created. Yet another question immediately surfaced. If that's true, why hide it from me? Daniel closed his eyes. And there it was. The real issue. The question behind every other question. Why hide it? Because people rarely destroy trust with one massive lie. They destroy it through dozens of smaller decisions. Each one justified at the time. Each one creating the next. His answer came quietly. Because I was ashamed. I laughed again. Not kindly. Ashamed of helping your brother. No. His eyes filled with tears. Ashamed that I needed help myself. The statement confused me. Daniel took a long breath. Then continued. And finally the full picture started emerging. 8 months earlier, Daniel had lost far more than he admitted. The company restructuring had not merely reduced his responsibilities. It had effectively ended his career path. Promotions vanished. Income declined. Future prospects narrowed. For the first time since his 20s, he felt like a failure. A word he hated. A word his family hated. A word his entire upbringing had trained him to fear. So instead of discussing it honestly, he hid it. Then James became ill. Medical expenses increased. Daniel started paying bills. Covering rent. Funding treatments. Supporting his brother. All while pretending everything remained normal. The pressure intensified. Savings disappeared. Stress accumulated. And eventually something broke inside him. I wrote the letter after one particularly bad week. His voice sounded hollow. I felt trapped. I remembered the date. 3 months earlier. The exact same period shown on the letter. I wasn't planning another life. He looked directly at me. I was trying to imagine any life that didn't feel impossible. For the first time, I believed him. Not completely. Not yet. But enough. Enough to keep listening. Enough to recognize pain when I saw it. Then came the hardest part. The letters. My aunt. The inheritance. The thing I still couldn't forgive. I leaned forward. Did you hide Aunt Margaret's letters? Daniel froze. Silence. The answer appeared before the words. His expression changed. And I knew. I knew. I knew. A long exhale escaped him. Yes. The admission hurt even more than discovering it. Because now there was no uncertainty. No possibility. No misunderstanding. Just fact. He had done it. 17 times. 17 deliberate choices. Why? The question emerged as barely more than a whisper. Daniel lowered his head. I thought she was changing her will. My stomach twisted. And I thought she was cutting you out. The explanation made no sense. None. Until he continued. She'd become angry after several family disagreements. I remembered those disagreements. Small arguments. Nothing dramatic. Certainly nothing worthy of estrangement. Yet older people sometimes make impulsive threats regarding inheritance. I had ignored them. Apparently Daniel hadn't. I thought receiving those letters would hurt you. I stared at him. The explanation sounded ridiculous. Absurd. Insulting. Then he said the part that finally revealed everything. I told myself I was protecting you. There it was. The lie beneath the lies. Not the action. The justification. Protecting you. 3 simple words. Words used throughout history to excuse countless betrayals. People convince themselves they're acting out of love. Then ignore the fact they've removed someone else's choice. Daniel wasn't protecting me. He was deciding for me. The distinction mattered enormously. And deep down, I think he finally understood that. Because tears rolled down his face. Real tears. Not performance. Not manipulation. Grief. Regret. Shame. All tangled together. I was wrong. The words came immediately. Without hesitation. Without defense. Without qualification. I know. For several minutes neither of us spoke. The house remained silent. Outside, evening sunlight stretched across the yard. Birds moved through the trees. The ordinary world continued. Meanwhile, 23 years of marriage sat exposed on our dining room table. Not destroyed. Exposed. And those are not the same thing. Because destruction is simple. Exposure is complicated. Exposure forces you to examine things honestly. Both good and bad. Strengths and failures. Love and resentment. Truth and illusion. Eventually, I asked the question that mattered most. The question beneath every other question. Did you stop loving me? Daniel looked genuinely shocked. Then deeply sad. No. The answer arrived instantly. Too quickly to be calculated. Too quickly to be strategic. No. Silence. Then, I stopped respecting myself. I didn't know what to do with that answer. Because suddenly the story wasn't about infidelity. Or inheritance. Or money. It was about something far more common. A man slowly unraveling under pressure. Making terrible decisions while convincing himself they were temporary. Necessary. Manageable. Until they weren't. Until everything collapsed. Until the truth arrived. And the truth had finally arrived. For both of us. Yet what neither of us realized in that moment was this. The inheritance wasn't the biggest surprise waiting for our family. Not even close. Because Aunt Margaret had left behind something far more valuable than money. Something she had planned very carefully. Something that would force every member of both families to confront the stories they had told about me for decades. And when that revelation came, quiet justice would arrive with it. The following Thursday, I sat inside Thomas Green's conference room. The office occupied the top floor of an old brick building downtown. Nothing flashy. Nothing extravagant. Just polished wood, framed certificates, and the quiet confidence that comes from decades of serious work. The inheritance meeting was scheduled for 10:00 a.m. By 9:45 I had already arrived. So had Daniel. Neither of us spoke much during the drive. Not because we were angry. Because we were exhausted. Some conversations changed the emotional landscape of a relationship. The one we'd had 5 nights earlier was one of them. We weren't healed. We weren't reconciled. But we were no longer pretending. Oddly, honesty felt less painful than uncertainty. At exactly 10:02, Thomas entered carrying 3 thick folders. He greeted us politely. Then sat across the table. Before we discuss assets, there is something your aunt specifically instructed me to share. I exchanged a glance with Daniel. Thomas opened a folder, removed a sealed envelope, and carefully slid it across the table. Written on the front, in unmistakable handwriting, were 3 words. For Alina only. My chest tightened. I recognized the handwriting instantly. Aunt Margaret. Even after all these months. Even after the funeral. Even after the grief. Seeing those letters felt like hearing her voice again. Thomas smiled gently. She insisted you read it first. My hands trembled as I opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter. 6 pages. The first line immediately blurred my vision. Dear Ellie, I know you're probably rolling your eyes because I've called you Ellie again. A laugh escaped me unexpectedly. For 30 years, she had been the only person who used that nickname. No one else. The room disappeared. The office disappeared. For a few minutes there was only the letter. And her voice inside my head. She wrote about my childhood. About family dinners. About summer visits. About teaching me how to bake peach pies when I was 12. About helping me study for accounting exams. About watching me build a life through persistence rather than attention. Then came the paragraph that changed everything. You spent your entire life being underestimated. Not because people disliked you. Because they became comfortable depending on you. People often stop noticing the strongest bridge because they cross it every day. I stopped reading. A lump formed in my throat. Strongest bridge. That sounded exactly like her. Practical. Observant. Quietly wise. I continued. Everyone celebrates fireworks because they are loud. Very few people celebrate foundations because they are silent, yet foundations hold up entire buildings. The tears arrived then. Not dramatic tears. Not uncontrollable sobbing. Just quiet grief. Because for the first time in years, I felt completely seen. Not for what I did. For who I was. And there is a difference. A huge difference. The letter continued. I know your family loves you. Most of them anyway. But love does not always produce recognition. People become trapped inside old versions of one another. I watched it happen for decades. They still see the girl who helps. They fail to see the woman who leads. The girl who supports. The woman who builds. The girl who serves. The woman who carries entire systems on her shoulders. My vision blurred again. Thomas remained respectfully silent. Daniel stared at the table. The final page contained one last message. The money is not the inheritance. It is simply a tool. The real inheritance is permission. Permission to stop shrinking yourself for people who have become comfortable with your silence. Live accordingly. Love, Aunt Margaret. For several moments nobody spoke. I folded the letter carefully. Not because it was fragile. Because it felt sacred. Thomas waited until I composed myself. Then he opened another folder. There's something else. I almost laughed. At that point, every meeting seemed to contain something else. Thomas adjusted his glasses. Your aunt created a secondary provision. Daniel frowned. A secondary provision. Thomas nodded. Yes. He slid several documents forward. She established a charitable foundation. I glanced down. My name appeared repeatedly. Chairperson. Director. Primary decision maker. I looked up. What is this? Thomas smiled. Your aunt followed your career closely. The answer surprised nobody more than me. Thomas continued. She admired your financial management work. Another stack of documents appeared. The foundation will begin with approximately $4 million. I stared. $4 million. Separate from the inheritance. Separate from everything else. The room became very quiet. Then Thomas delivered the real surprise. The foundation's purpose is funding financial literacy programs for women rebuilding their lives after major personal setbacks. I blinked. What? He nodded. Divorce, widowhood, career interruption, financial abuse, situations where people require education and support. My pulse quickened. Because suddenly I understood. Aunt Margaret hadn't merely left money. She had left purpose, direction, responsibility, a future. The realization hit harder than the inheritance itself. For years, I had quietly helped clients navigate financial crises. Now I had the opportunity to build something larger. Something meaningful. Something lasting. Thomas smiled. She believed you were uniquely qualified. Those words stayed with me. Uniquely qualified. Not helpful. Not dependable. Not useful. Qualified. Respected. Trusted. Seen. The meeting lasted another 2 hours. By the time we left the office, my entire future looked different. Not because of wealth. Because of possibility. And news traveled quickly. Very quickly. Within 48 hours, nearly everyone in both families knew. The reactions were fascinating. Richard became unusually polite. Vanessa suddenly wanted lunch together. Several distant cousins reached out. Old acquaintances resurfaced. People who hadn't called in years somehow discovered my phone number. The pattern would have annoyed me once. Now I simply observed it. Human nature is remarkably predictable. Status changes reveal relationships. Not create them. Reveal them. The most interesting reaction came from Margaret Carter. My mother-in-law requested dinner. Just the two of us. No Daniel. No family. No audience. Just us. The request alone felt unusual. Margaret rarely initiated private conversations. Curious, I accepted. The dinner took place at a small restaurant overlooking the river. She arrived exactly on time. Elegant as always. Perfect posture. Perfect appearance. Perfect control. At least initially. We ordered. Made small talk. Discussed weather. Traffic. Mutual acquaintances. Then finally Margaret set down her fork. And looked directly at me. I owe you an apology. The words surprised me so much I nearly dropped my glass. Margaret Carter did not apologize. Ever. Yet here she was. Doing exactly that. She took a slow breath. I spent years misunderstanding you. I remained silent. Letting her continue. You were always so competent that everyone simply assumed you'd be fine. A sad smile crossed her face. That sounds ridiculous when I say it out loud. I nodded slightly. Yes. To her credit, she laughed. A genuine laugh. Not defensive. Not offended. Honest. Then she said something unexpected. You know, I used to think Michael was the successful one in your family. I blinked. My brother. Yes. Another pause. Then I watched people call you whenever they had a real problem. The statement landed heavily. Because she wasn't wrong. Tax issues. Estate questions. Business concerns. Retirement planning. Family emergencies. People always called me. Yet somehow that reality never translated into recognition. Margaret looked out the window. Then back at me. I confused visibility with value. There it was. The truth. Simple. Direct. Painfully accurate. Visibility with value. Some people appear important. Others quietly are important. The distinction often goes unnoticed until much later. For the first time since meeting her 24 years earlier, I felt like Margaret was seeing me clearly. Not the family roles. Not the stereotype. Me. And strangely enough, that recognition felt more valuable than the inheritance. Because money changes circumstances. Recognition changes relationships. And some relationships had finally begun changing. But the most important one still remained unresolved. The one waiting for me at home. The one sitting across from me every morning at breakfast. The one built over 23 complicated years. Daniel. And deciding what came next would require more courage than receiving $11.8 million ever could.